My name is Carter Reeves, and 10 years ago I lived exclusively as a freelance photographer. The work was unstable, the bills were always on edge, but it was the only thing that really made me feel alive. At the time, I was 27 years old and had just taken a job that seemed perfect, photographing the vast landscapes of the Arizona desert for a local publication. They wanted to capture the solitude and raw beauty of that place at dusk. Although the pay was average, the opportunity to expand my portfolio was irresistible. I arrived at the place at the end of a sultry afternoon, driving a car borrowed from a friend. The starting point was a small village, almost a blur on the map, with time-worn wooden houses and few signs of life. While I was filling up the car at the only gas station in the region, an elderly man with a sunburned face and sunken eyes came up to me. He pointed to the hills to the north and said something that still echoes in my mind today. "Avoid going where the earth is too quiet." I thought it was just talk from a suspicious man, so I smiled, thanked him, and ignored the warning. On the first day, everything went well. I parked on a plateau with a privileged view of the desert and spent hours adjusting the tripod, capturing the sunset and the shadows that stretched across the sand. Night fell like a thick cloak, and I pitched my tent under a sky covered with stars. I felt the weight of silence for the first time. It wasn't the kind of silence that soothes, but an almost palpable emptiness. There were no crickets, no rustling of leaves, just the occasional sound of the wind, muffled and distant. Just before 10 p.m., I decided to go out to photograph the rock formations under the moonlight. I took my flashlight and walked a few meters, carefully choosing the path between rocks and cacti. That's when I heard the sound for the first time. It was smooth, like fingernails scratching a rough surface. I stopped, turned my head towards the sound, but saw nothing but the shadows cast by the flashlight. My heart raced, but I forced myself to laugh. It must just be some small animal, I thought, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. I kept walking, trying to concentrate on work. I positioned the camera at a high point and adjusted the shutter to capture the pale glow of the desert. At night. It was then that I noticed something out of place. In the corner of the viewfinder, an elongated shadow seemed to move. I looked up quickly, but there was nothing there. I checked the camera again, and this time the shadow was closer. A blurred humanoid silhouette, as if it had been blurred by movement. A shiver ran down my spine, and I instinctively stepped away from the camera, scanning the surroundings with the flashlight. That's when I saw the eyes, two bright spots reflecting the light from the flashlight from about 30 meters away. I fixed the beam of light in that direction, trying to discern what was staring at me. It looked like an animal, maybe a coyote, but something was wrong. The body was too thin, the limbs disproportionately long and stiff. He seemed to struggle to balance, as if his own weight was a challenge. My instinct screamed for me to go back, but my curiosity made me freeze. The sound that followed was not natural, a mixture of growling and something that resembled a muffled laugh. The creature tilted its head to the side, watching me for a moment before moving. His movements were abrupt, as if someone was pulling invisible ropes. In an instant, it disappeared behind a rock formation, leaving only the echo of its strange sound in the night. My heart was racing. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, telling myself that it was just some deformed or sick animal. I hurried back to camp, looking over my shoulder with every step. When I finally entered the tent, I locked the zipper and sat down, holding the camera as if it were a gun. My brain worked frantically, revisiting what had happened. To try to distract myself, I started reviewing the photos taken earlier. Most of them were what I expected. Desert landscapes, elongated shadows, the vibrant sky at sunset. But then, I saw something that made my stomach turn. In one of the photos in the background was the same humanoid figure I had seen, crouching, staring directly into the lens. My breathing became irregular, and for a moment I was paralyzed, unable to look away from that image. I zoomed in as much as I could, and the details that emerged made me even more uneasy. The eyes, even in the pixelated grain of the photo, were bright and inhuman. Her arms felt longer than usual, and there was something about her posture, a mix of tension and predatory, that made my skin crawl. I tried to delete the photo, but my fingers were shaking so much that I pressed the wrong buttons a few times. Before finally deleting it, I decided that I couldn't spend the night in that place. I started to gather my things in a hurry, but the sound came back, this time closer. It was the same guttural growl, interspersed with that dry, almost mocking laugh. With each second, it seemed to be closer. I stopped packing and grabbed my flashlight. I left the tent, my hand holding the light tightly, as if it were a shield. The flashlight swept the terrain around the camp, but I couldn't see anything. Even so, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Then I heard footsteps, slow, dragged, but strangely heavy. The sound was coming from the opposite direction I was looking. I spun quickly and the flashlight caught a movement between the stones. It was then that I saw him again, this time closer. He was standing, maybe 15 yards away. His thin body looked even more distorted in the light. I tried to shout something, a weak "go away," but my voice failed. The creature stepped forward, and for a moment I stood still. The way he moved, tilting his head to the side as he watched me, was incredibly human, but at the same time completely strange. The flashlight began to fail, oscillating between light and shadow. When the light finally went out, all I could hear was the slow, choppy breathing of the thing. Now very close. With my heart racing, I turned and ran as fast as I could, tripping over the rocks and slipping on the sandy ground. I didn't even look back. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to keep going, even as my legs threatened to give way. All I wanted was distance from that place and that thing. In the middle of the rush, I realized that I was disoriented. The cliffs, which had once served as a point of reference, now all looked the same. It was as if the desert itself was conspiring to keep me imprisoned there. After running for a time that seemed eternal to me, I saw a rock formation that I recognized, the place where I had taken one of the photos the day before. I felt a momentary relief, but he was quickly overwhelmed by a sound that came from all sides. Laughter. They were not normal laughter. They had a metallic quality, as if they were emitted by something that shouldn't be able to laugh. I circled, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to move, now to the left, now to the right, as if it was mocking me. Then, something emerged from the shadows. It was the creature again, but she wasn't alone. There were two other figures, both with the same thin, distorted bodies, moving with the same unnatural strangeness. They stood still for a few seconds, just watching me, like predators analyzing prey. Then, in perfect synchrony, they began to walk towards me. My body reacted before my mind could process it. I ran again, feeling their eyes burning on my back. The laughter kept increasing in intensity as I walked away. My lungs were burning, and my legs were about to give up, but I kept running, driven only by pure survival instinct. Finally, I spotted the jeep. He was right where I had left him. But something was wrong. The doors were open, as if someone had rummaged inside him. The lights flashed intermittently, and the engine, which I knew I had turned off correctly, made a low sound, as if trying to start on its own. Without thinking, I ran towards the vehicle. As I got closer, I saw strange marks on the metal, as if claws or fingernails had scratched the paint deeply. My stomach churned when I noticed that there was something in the driver's seat. I paused for a moment, hesitating to get closer. Carefully, I looked through the window glass. There was a figure sitting with his back to me. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his hands rested on the steering wheel. But his fingers were incredibly long, stretched abnormally. I took a deep breath and took courage. "Get out of there," I shouted, my voice echoing in the silent desert. The figure did not move immediately. Then, in a slow, unnatural motion, she turned her head toward me, and that's when I saw it. It was my face, or rather, a horribly deformed version of him. His eyes were completely black, lifeless, and his mouth opened in a grotesque smile that seemed to divide his face into two parts. My instincts took over again. I ran to the back of the car, trying to escape his sight. That's when I heard a horrible sound of fingernails deeply scratching the car window. It shattered and the figure disappeared, as if it had never been there. I took the moment to jump into the Jeep, closing the door and trying to start the engine, my hands shaking so much they could barely hold the key. The engine roared, but the lights flashed as if something was interfering. Behind me, I heard quick footsteps, like several creatures running towards me. I didn't look, I just sped up, driving as fast as I could down the sandy trail. The sound of laughter followed me, mixed with the sound of scratches on the vehicle's bodywork, as if they were trying to reach it. The Jeep rattled violently as I advanced along the bumpy trail. I didn't care about the damage, I just wanted to get out of there. The sounds around me of laughter and scratching began to intensify, as if something was fast approaching. I looked in the rearview mirror out of pure reflex, but I wished I hadn't. Thin, distorted figures ran alongside the vehicle, following my speed. Their bodies moved erratically, as if they were puppets being manipulated by invisible wires. My vision was blurred from sweat and panic, but I kept speeding even when the trail seemed more dangerous. However, the Jeep began to lose power, choking, as if something was preventing the engine from working properly. I knew that if the vehicle stopped, it would be the end of me. Suddenly, I felt an impact on the back of the Jeep, as if something big had jumped and fallen on it. The body swayed violently, and a metallic sound echoed, followed by scratches on the top of the roof. My heart almost stopped. That was trying to get in. I grabbed a small crowbar under the passenger seat that I used for emergencies. Holding the high tool tightly, I slammed on the brakes, causing the Jeep to skid in the sand. The impact was enough for the weight on the ceiling to slip and fall with a dull thud on the floor. Before I could breathe a sigh of relief, I saw something standing up through the window. The figure was tall, slender, but completely deformed. His head hung to the side, and his arms were disproportionately long. He stared at me, motionless, as an impossibly wide smile formed on his face. Without a second thought, I accelerated again, swerving the vehicle to avoid that thing. The Jeep passed her, but I felt a chill when I realized that her eyes followed me, fixed and penetrating, as if she could see me even from the back. The laughter did not stop, now coming from all sides. It was as if the desert itself was mocking me. The trail finally ended, and I reached a dirt road that seemed to lead away. The feeling of relief was momentary, as the sound of laughter continued to haunt me, even though I could no longer see those figures in the rearview mirror. At one point, I realized that my heart was still beating at a frantic pace, and that my hands were so shaky that I could barely hold the steering wheel. The Rover was almost out of fuel, but at least it was still moving. I began to see small signs of civilization in the distance, streetlights that seemed far away, but at the same time gave me hope that I was getting somewhere safe. Still, the silence inside the vehicle was overwhelming, and every little noise made me jump. Finally, I arrived at an area that seemed to be a half-abandoned gas station. It was a small place, with a single rusty bomb and a broken glass office. I knew there was no one there to help, but I parked anyway, desperately needing a moment to compose myself. I got out of the Jeep and looked around. All was quiet, but not in a comforting way. It was the same silence I felt that first night at camp. As I tried to calm my breathing, I noticed something on the horizon. A solitary figure, standing at a good distance but clearly observing. It was difficult to discern details in that dim light, but its outline was unmistakable. Thin, disproportionate, with arms that seemed too long for a human being. Suddenly, he took a step towards me, and my whole body reacted. I climbed back into the Jeep and tried to turn it back on. The engine was slow to start, coughing as if it was fighting against time. The figure kept moving forward, slow but decisive, each step reverberating in my head like a warning sign. When the Jeep finally showed signs of life, I accelerated so hard that the wheels skidded on the dirt, kicking up dust. I looked in the rearview mirror only once, and the figure was no longer there. I felt a momentary relief, but I soon realized that it would not last. I knew deep down that it wasn't over yet. After driving for a few more miles, I spotted the lights of a small town on the horizon. It was as if I had found an oasis in the middle of a nightmare. I didn't think twice. I sped towards the lights. My only goal was to reach somewhere where there were people. But as I got closer, I began to notice something strange. The lights seemed to change places, as if the city was moving, or worse, avoiding me. I looked around, trying to situate myself, but everything around was just darkness and that same overwhelming silence. My mind was starting to play tricks, and I could almost hear whispers coming from somewhere, incomprehensible words that made me shiver. Finally, I arrived at what seemed to be the beginning of the city. The houses were small and were all unlit, except for one at the end of the main street. The light flickered on the balcony like an invitation. I stopped the jeep in the middle of the road and got off, hesitantly. My only weapon was a small flashlight that I grabbed before running out of camp. As I approached the house, I realized something was wrong. The windows were broken, the door ajar, and the light on the balcony flickered as if it was about to go out for good. When I put my foot on the first rung of the ladder, I felt like I was being watched again. The same oppressive feeling as if the air around me was too heavy. Before I could decide whether to enter or not, I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly, illuminating it with the flashlight, but I saw nothing. Still, I knew there was something there. Then, out of nowhere, the door of the house opened slowly, as if inviting me in. The door opened with a sharp creak that cut through the silence, and for a moment, I was paralyzed. It was as if time had slowed down around me. I knew I shouldn't go in there. I knew it was a mistake, but something inside me, maybe exhaustion or fear, made me take a step forward. The flickering light of the balcony was the only thing that stood out in the darkness of that deserted street. I entered, with my heart beating strongly in my chest. The interior of the house was in complete abandonment. The smell of mold and rotting wood filled the air, and the ground creaked beneath my feet. The lantern slowly illuminated the details that were hidden in the shadows: broken furniture, scattered papers, a sense of utter desolation. It seemed that no one had lived there for a long time. As I approached the living room, I heard a slight breath, as if someone was trying to keep up with me, but without making a sound. I turned towards the sound, and there, in the dim light, was a figure. It wasn't human, but it wasn't what I'd seen before either. It had an indistinct shape, a silhouette that seemed to distort as if it were made of smoke. I tried to take a step back, but my feet felt glued to the ground. The figure began to move, sliding in the opposite direction of the flashlight, heading into the dark hallway on the right. Her every move was erratic, as if it didn't have a solid shape, but I felt the mounting pressure of fear, as if she was approaching me with the intention of swallowing me. Suddenly, the silence was broken again, but this time, it wasn't the sound of laughter or footsteps. It was something worse, the sound of a door closing. I didn't know where it came from, but my gut told me that that door was a prison I was about to be thrown in. My breath was stuck in my throat. I knew I was in danger, but something in me, perhaps fear or despair, made me move toward the hallway. The sound of the door closing still echoed in my mind, as if the house was swallowing me, dragging me to a destination I couldn't control. The figure, that elusive shadow, had disappeared into the darkness, but I could feel its presence as if it had been watching me all the time. I crawled down the hallway, each step heavy and full of fear. The flashlight flashed, almost as if it had a mind of its own, and I was beginning to doubt my sanity. The air was thicker, warmer, and it felt like the house itself was breathing. At some point, I started to feel a pressure in my ears, as if an invisible force was squeezing my head, forcing me to see things I shouldn't. When I reached the door at the end of the hallway, the light of the flashlight flashed several times as if to alert me. Suddenly it went out, leaving me in the most absolute darkness. I tried to light it again until it worked. Panic began to take over me. Suddenly a cold, icy hand touched my shoulder. I froze. I didn't dare to turn around because I knew that if I looked, I wouldn't be able to handle what was there. It was then that I heard slow footsteps approaching, followed by muffled breathing, as if someone was trying to keep as quiet as possible, but to no avail. I remained motionless, trying to control the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. When I finally forced myself to turn, I came face to face with a man, sweaty and visibly tired, his eyes wide with fear. He was standing next to the wall, but something about him didn't feel right. He seemed almost relieved to see me, as if he had finally found someone with whom he could share his pain. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice shaky. "I also thought I could spend the night in peace, but they don't let them. They're always there." He gestured mindlessly into the void, as if something invisible was watching. Before I could react, he began to speak more agitatedly. the story slipping from his lips almost as if he couldn't stop. My car broke down a few kilometers from here. It was no big deal, just a mechanical failure, something I could fix in minutes. But when I went to check the engine, I heard strange noises coming from the bush. Sounds that they did not belong there. It was dark, but I swore I saw something moving between the trees. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my head, but the fear grew. I decided to go back to the car, but when I got in, the engine didn't work anymore. He was completely dead. So I started walking towards the city, but something followed me. Something was watching me, chasing me. He stopped, breathing hard as if reliving that moment. He continued. I ran, but I felt the footsteps behind me. It was no longer just noise. It was as if the wind was chasing me, and there was no wind at all. The dread I felt was indescribable. You have no idea. I came to a small road, and in the distance I saw a house. I thought about asking for help. The fear of continuing to walk around that place was consuming me. But when I entered, I realized that the house was not common. There was something strange about her. It felt like it was waiting for me. He looked at me with a desperate expression, as if trying to convince me that the situation was beyond our comprehension. He was paler now, as if the words were draining his energies. I thought that at least I would be safer there until dawn. But no. The air was heavy, as if the place was suffocating everything around. I heard footsteps outside the house, but there was no one. I couldn't sleep. I stayed up all night, listening to noises, whispers, things I couldn't identify. I just wanted to get out, but I couldn't move. When it finally dawned, what I saw left me even more lost. The house was different. It didn't look the same, as if it had changed overnight. The walls were dirtier, the hallway seemed longer. I walked to the door, and when I opened it, the landscape outside didn't look the same. The bushes were in places I swore they weren't the day before. And the worst, silence. There was nothing else there, as if everything I experienced was a hallucination. He looked at me with a look full of uncertainty and said, "Me and you, we need to get out of here, no matter what. This place, I can't stay here anymore, none of us can." He shook his head as if trying to push away the memory of everything he had been through. Our plan was simple: leave as soon as daylight dawned. When the sunlight finally appeared on the horizon, we quickly left the house. The feeling of relief was immediate, but it also brought a sense of loss, as if we were leaving something behind. Something we can't fully understand. The road was better. The bush seemed less dense, and the sounds of nature began to fill the air. It was as if everything had returned to normal, but still, a strange sensation hovered over us. When we got far enough away from the house, I looked back, and everything seemed as normal as the scenery of any small town, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same. I thought for a moment about going back to camp and trying to recover my equipment, but just thinking about finding that creature, I let it go. Neither of us said anything as we left, but as we walked away, there was one thing that was clear. We would never go back to this place. Nothing in the world would make us do that. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.